The crowd gasped in disbelief. Lady Constance's hand struck Evelyn's cheek with a force that echoed across the garden, the slap a sound of humiliation so sharp it silenced the aristocratic gathering. But before anyone could move, the Duke of Wetherby stepped forward with a cold precision, his hand wrapped around Lady Constance's wrist, his grip unyielding, and he leaned in to whisper in her ear, his voice like ice. "That was your last mistake. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face." Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. The pocket watch felt cold against Evelyn's palm, its silver surface catching the weak autumn light filtering through her father's study window. She traced the engraved inscription with her thumb, the words she'd memorized long ago. "Time reveals all truth, my darling girl." "Does it, Papa?" she whispered to the empty room. "What truth has time revealed except that I'm a coward?" 6 months. Half a year since Lord Edmund Hargrave had been laid to rest in the family plot, and still Evelyn found herself seeking sanctuary in this room. Everything remained exactly as he'd left it, the leather-bound ledgers stacked precisely on the mahogany desk, the faint scent of pipe tobacco clinging to the curtains, the morning sun illuminating the same worn patch of carpet where he'd paced while teaching her about crop rotation and tenant rights. An estate is more than land and titles. Evelyn, his voice echoed in her memory. It's people, their livelihoods, their families, their futures. Never forget that. She sank into his chair, the leather creaking familiarly, and closed her eyes. How many hours had she spent here as a girl, perched on the edge of this very seat while he explained contracts and drainage systems? He'd treated her like the son he'd never had, ignoring society's expectations that ladies concern themselves only with needlework and watercolors. "You have a sharp mind, my darling girl," he'd said, letting her examine the estate maps spread across the desk. "Sharper than most men I know. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. A sharp mind. What good was it now, trapped like a bird in a gilded cage?" The door crashed open without warning. "There you are." Lady Constance's voice cut through the memory like a blade through silk. "I should have known I'd find you wallowing in here." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the watch as she rose, schooling her features into careful neutrality. Her stepmother stood in the doorway, resplendent in deep purple mourning silk that somehow managed to look more fashionable than somber. At 43, Constance remained beautiful in a cold, calculated way, every blonde curl precisely placed, every movement measured for maximum effect. "I was reviewing the tenant contracts," Evelyn said quietly, gesturing to the ledgers. "The Michaelmas rents are due soon, and the estate manager handles such matters now." Constance swept into the room, her skirts whispering against the floor. "Your father indulged your peculiar interests, but I won't have you pretending to understand business affairs. It's unseemly, unseemly." Everything Evelyn did was unseemly, in Constance's estimation. Speaking with tenant farmers, reading political newspapers, having opinions. "Father taught me. Your father is dead." The words landed like a slap. Constance lifted a ledger, examined it with theatrical distaste, and dropped it back onto the desk, and his outdated notions died with him. "Now, we have the day to plan. The Duke of Wetherby's garden party is in 3 days, and you'll need proper preparation." Evelyn's stomach clenched. "The garden party?" "Yes, Lord Henry Whitmore will be in attendance." Constance smiled, the expression never reaching her ice-blue eyes. "A most promising match. Second son of the Earl of Pembroke, recently come into a significant inheritance from his maternal uncle. I have no interest in Lord Whitmore. Your interests are irrelevant." Constance moved to the window, adjusting her perfectly arranged hair in the glass reflection. "Your father's will was quite clear. Until you marry with my approval or reach 25, I serve as guardian of the estate. 3 more years of your stubborn independence, Evelyn, or you accept a suitable match now. Lord Whitmore is suitable. 3 more years." The number haunted Evelyn's dreams. She was 22 in age, when most ladies of her station were already married with children, but marriage meant surrendering what little autonomy she retained. Under English law, everything she owned would become her husband's property the moment she spoke her vows. "I won't be sold like livestock," Evelyn said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Constance turned slowly, her expression hardening. Sold? My dear stepdaughter, I'm offering you security, protection. A woman alone is vulnerable, as you're learning. Or would you prefer I make other arrangements? The threat hung in the air between them. Evelyn had heard the whispered warnings before asylums, places where inconvenient women disappeared behind locked doors, declared hysterical or mad by doctors whose loyalty could be purchased. "I'll attend the garden party," Evelyn said finally, hating the defeat in her voice. "Good. Now, about your wardrobe." The breakfast room felt suffocating despite its generous proportions. Evelyn sat rigid in her chair. The lavender morning dress she'd chosen modest, appropriate, her favorite color now a source of conflict. "Absolutely not." Constance's fork clattered against her plate. "That color makes you look sallow, and the neckline is far too severe. Lord Whitmore will think you a prude." Across the table, Beatrice kept her eyes fixed on her poached eggs. Evelyn's stepsister was 19, pretty in an unremarkable way, and had mastered the art of becoming invisible during Constance's tirades. Evelyn couldn't entirely blame her. Beatrice had grown up under Constance's thumb. She knew no other way. "The dress is perfectly appropriate," Evelyn said carefully. "I'll determine what's appropriate in my household." Constance dabbed her lips with her napkin, the gesture somehow conveying contempt. "You'll wear the rose silk tomorrow, and the cream day dress to the garden party. The one with the lower neckline." "Mother," Beatrice ventured quietly, "the lavender is quite becoming. Did I ask for your opinion?" Constance's gaze swiveled to her daughter. Beatrice shrank back, color flooding her cheeks. "No? Then kindly keep your thoughts to yourself." Evelyn's jaw tightened. This was how it always went. Constance, wielding cruelty like a conductor's baton, orchestrating their misery with practiced precision. "Your posture, Evelyn." Constance's attention returned like a hawk spotting prey. "You slouch like a scullery maid, and must you butter your toast so vigorously? A lady takes delicate bites. Small, refined. Small, refined, invisible." Evelyn set down her knife, her appetite vanishing. "I received a letter yesterday," Constance continued, producing an envelope from her sleeve like a magician revealing a trick. "From Mr. Blackwell, your father's former solicitor. He seems to have questions about certain estate transactions." Ice water flooded Evelyn's veins. "What transactions?" "Nothing that concerns you. I've handled everything perfectly legally." But something flickered in Constance's expression, uncertainty perhaps, or calculation. "However, his interference is tiresome. I've dismissed him and retained Mr. Thaddeus Pike instead. A much more understanding gentleman." Evelyn's hands clenched in her lap. Mr. Blackwell had been her father's solicitor for 20 years, a man of impeccable integrity. His questions likely meant he'd discovered something wrong with how Constance was managing the estate. "You can't simply dismiss. I can do whatever I please." Constance's smile was razor-sharp. "I'm the guardian, remember? Every decision, every signature, every sale, all perfectly within my rights, until you marry or reach your majority. So you see, my dear, cooperation benefits us both. Defy me, and I'll ensure those 3 years feel like 30. The threat was clear. Constance had already sold the North pasture land to a neighbor at half its value. She'd dismissed Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper who'd been with the family since before Evelyn was born. She'd replaced experienced tenant farmers with cheaper labor, ignoring their family's welfare, and Evelyn was powerless to stop any of it. "I've also taken the liberty of reviewing your correspondence." Constance produced another letter, this one in Evelyn's handwriting. A letter to Lady Margaret Ashford, the Duke of Wetherby's eccentric aunt? Planning to appeal to her for assistance, were we? Shame and fury warred in Evelyn's chest. She'd written that letter in desperation 3 weeks ago, hoping Lady Margaret, known for her independent spirit and political connections, might offer guidance. She'd never had the courage to send it. "I thought not." Constance tore the letter in half, then quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the table like snow. "You have no allies, Evelyn, no champions. Your father's friends have their own concerns, and society has no patience for difficult young women. Marry Lord Whitmore, and this unpleasantness ends. Refuse, and I'll make your life a study in misery." She rose, smoothing her skirts. "You'll spend this morning practicing your watercolors. Lord Whitmore appreciates artistic accomplishment in a wife, and do something about your hair. Those curls are positively wild." The door closed behind her with decisive finality. Beatrice finally looked up, guilt swimming in her hazel eyes. Evelyn, don't. Evelyn's voice came out harsher than intended. Just don't. She couldn't bear sympathy, not from someone who watched it all happen and said nothing. Evening found Evelyn alone in her bedchamber, staring at her reflection in the dressing-table mirror. The face looking back seemed that of a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, diminished. When had she become this one creature, this silent, obedient ghost haunting her own life? She pulled the pocket watch from beneath her pillow, where she'd hidden it from Constance's prying. The silver caught the candlelight, throwing dancing shadows across her hands. Time reveals all truth, my darling girl. What truth, Papa? She whispered. That I'm weak? That I can't protect what you built? That I'm failing you? But she knew her father would never think such things. He'd taught her to be strong, to think critically, to question authority when authority was wrong. The weakness wasn't in her nature, it was in her circumstances. The law that gave Constance power. The society that saw women as property to be managed rather than people with agency. 3 more years until she reached 25. 3 more years of watching Constance dismantle her father's legacy piece by piece. 3 more years of being controlled, criticized, diminished. Or she could marry Lord Whitmore, a man she'd met twice, whose eyes had assessed her like a horse at auction, calculating her worth in acres and annual income. Marriage would end Constance's guardianship, but it would only transfer control to another master. English law was brutally clear. A married woman owned nothing, not even herself. I can survive 3 more years, she told her reflection, trying to believe it. I have to. But as she clutched the watch against her heart, feeling its steady tick-tick-tick against her palm, Evelyn wondered if survival was enough, if there might be something more than merely enduring, something like actual freedom. She thought of the garden party in 3 days. The Duke of Wetherby's estate, with its legendary gardens and its reclusive host. Lord Whitmore would be there, already negotiating her future with Constance like she was a thoroughbred mare. 3 more years, she whispered again, but this time it sounded less like determination and more like a prayer. Outside her window, the autumn night pressed close, and somewhere in the darkness, a clock chimed the hour, time moving forward whether she willed it or not, revealing truths she wasn't certain she wanted to face. Chapter 2. The garden party begins. Alexander Ashford, Duke of Wetherby, stood on the stone terrace of his ancestral home and contemplated the particular brand of torture that was a garden party. Below him, carriages deposited their glittering cargo onto the curved drive, ladies in pastel silks, gentlemen in dark coats, all wearing the same practiced expressions of polite anticipation that characterized London society. He was 31 years old and had been attending such gatherings since he could walk. One would think familiarity might breed tolerance, if not affection. Instead, it had only sharpened his distaste. "You're doing your statue impression again," James Worthington observed, joining him at the balustrade. Alexander's estate manager and closest friend carried 2 glasses of champagne, offering one with a knowing smile. "The guests will think you've been petrified by Medusa." "One can hope." Alexander accepted the glass but didn't drink. "How many have arrived?" 73 and counting. The Pemberton sisters are laying siege to the refreshment table. Lady Hartwick is already spreading gossip about the Thornbury scandal. Lord Breslin appears to be 3 sheets to the wind, despite it being barely past noon. James consulted his mental catalogue with practiced ease, and at least 4 mothers have inquired whether you'll be dancing later. Another season, another parade of debutantes and their scheming mothers. You could simply marry and end the speculation. Alexander turned to his friend with an arched eyebrow. "I could also throw myself into the Thames, but I prefer to avoid both." James laughed, but his expression sobered. "Society has grown rather creative in their sobriquet for you. The Ice Duke is the current favourite." "How flattering. Last year I was the Marble Duke. At least ice suggests I might eventually thaw." Alexander's tone was dry, but the nickname stung more than he cared to admit. Not cruel, he'd never been deliberately unkind, simply distant, exact in his expectations, impossible to charm because charm itself felt like manipulation. 6 years. 6 years since a riding accident had transformed him from the second son, free to pursue scholarship and relative obscurity, into the Duke of Wetherby with all its attendant responsibilities. His older brother, Thomas, had been everything a duke should be. Charismatic, socially graceful, beloved by all who knew him. Thomas had loved these gatherings, moving through crowds like sunlight through water, making everyone feel valued and seen. Alexander's gaze drifted to the gardens below, precisely manicured hedges forming geometric patterns around beds of late-season roses. Thomas had commissioned this design in the year before his death, working with the head gardener to create something both beautiful and mathematically harmonious. "You think too much, Alex," Thomas had said, sketching garden plans by candlelight. "Not everything requires analysis. Sometimes you simply feel." But feeling had died with Thomas on a muddy road in Hertfordshire. What remained was duty, obligation, and the grinding machinery of an estate that employed 200 souls and influenced the livelihoods of thousands more. Alexander had inherited the title, but not his brother's ease with people. He managed Wetherby with competence and precision, but without joy. "The Marchioness of Eldridge is holding court by the fountain," James noted, pulling Alexander from his reverie. "I believe she's brought her niece. Again. The girl who speaks only in superlatives. Everything is either utterly divine or positively dreadful." "The very same." Alexander observed the arriving guests with a practiced eye. Lord Hamilton, perpetually one bad investment from debtor's prison. The Misses Thornbury, desperate to secure husbands before their father's fortune evaporated. Mr. Geoffrey Wade, whose political ambitions exceeded his intelligence by a considerable margin. He could write their scripts before they opened their mouths. The careful compliments about Wetherby's grounds, the subtle inquiries about his availability, the calculated placement of eligible daughters in his line of sight. It was theatre, and he'd grown weary of performing his assigned role. Then the Hargrave carriage arrived. Alexander's attention sharpened involuntarily. The black lacquered vehicle bore the Hargrave coat of arms, a stag rampant, though the gold leaf had faded since he'd last seen it. That would have been at Edmund Hargrave's funeral 6 months prior, where Alexander had stood in the rain watching a good man laid to rest far too young. Edmund had been a friend, or as close to one as Alexander's position typically allowed. They'd met during a parliamentary session 5 years ago, discovering a shared interest in agricultural reform. Edmund had possessed that rare quality of speaking to Alexander as a person rather than a title, offering advice during those first overwhelming months of Alexander's unexpected dukedom. "The hardest part," Edmund had said over brandy one evening, "is balancing what you want with what's required. But remember, you're a man first, Duke second. Don't lose yourself in the role." Easy advice to give, considerably harder to follow. The carriage door opened, and Lady Constance Hargrave emerged first, all calculated grace and fashionable mourning attire that somehow managed to look more stylish than somber. Alexander had met her twice, both times finding her as appealing as a snake in silk. Beautiful, certainly, but cold, watchful, a woman who viewed every interaction as a transaction. Then came Lady Evelyn. Alexander straightened despite himself. He'd last seen Edmund's daughter at the funeral, a pale figure in black, silent and hollow-eyed with grief. Edmund had spoken of her constantly, pride evident in every word. "Brilliant girl, my Evelyn, sharp as any Oxford scholar. We've been reviewing the estate contracts together. She understands land management better than most men I know." But the woman descending from the carriage bore little resemblance to Edmund's descriptions. She moved with grace. Yes, her posture perfect, her steps measured, but something was profoundly wrong. Her eyes remained downcast, fixed on the ground rather than taking in Wetherby's famous gardens. Her dove-grey dress was expensive but severe, draining colour from her complexion. She held herself with the rigid control of a person braced for impact. Lady Constance's hand closed around Evelyn's elbow, possessive and controlling. Even from this distance, Alexander could see the older woman's smile, all teeth and false warmth, as she greeted other guests. "That's not right," Alexander murmured. "What isn't?" James followed his gaze. "Lady Evelyn," Edmund said. She was curious, spirited, laughed like sunlight. Alexander's jaw tightened. "That woman looks like a ghost." He watched them cross the lawn, Lady Constance steering Evelyn with the practiced control of a jailer escorting a prisoner. They were heading directly toward Lord Henry Whitmore, who stood near the ornamental pond looking pleased with himself. Alexander knew Whitmore's reputation intimately, gambling debts at 3 separate clubs, 2 failed courtships when the ladies' families discovered his financial situation, currently desperate for an heiress to salvage his circumstances. The man was handsome enough, well connected through his father's title, but utterly without substance or integrity. "Surely Constance isn't attempting to match Lady Evelyn with Whitmore," James said, disapproval clear in his voice. "It would solve both their problems. Whitmore gets an inheritance. Constance secures her stepdaughter's future while maintaining influence. Alexander set down his untouched champagne. Edmund would be appalled. Before he quite realized he'd made the decision, Alexander was moving down the terrace steps toward the lawn. James called something after him, but the words didn't register. He reached them as Constance was making introductions, her voice honey-sweet. "Lord Whitmore, may I present my stepdaughter, Lady Evelyn Hargrave." Whitmore executed a perfect bow, his eyes conducting a calculating assessment. "Lady Evelyn, I was deeply sorry to hear of your father's passing. A gentleman of great distinction." Evelyn murmured something appropriate, her voice so quiet Alexander barely heard it. "Your Grace!" Constance turned, surprise flickering across her features before being smoothed into delight. "What an honor! We were just—" "Lady Constance." Alexander's greeting was polite, but deliberately cool. Then he shifted his attention, his voice warming slightly. "Lady Evelyn, your father spoke of you often. He would be pleased to see you here." Evelyn's eyes lifted for the first time, meeting his. For just a second, no more than a heartbeat, Alexander saw something alive there. Surprise, certainly. Recognition, perhaps, though they'd never been formally introduced, and something else he couldn't quite name. Hope? Then it vanished, shuttered behind careful blankness so quickly he wondered if he'd imagined it. "Your Grace is most kind," she said softly. "Father held you in high regard. The regard was mutual. He was instrumental in helping me navigate my early tenure as Duke." Alexander wanted to say more, wanted to ask if she was well, if she needed assistance. But Constance was already interjecting. "How thoughtful of you to remember Edmund. Now, I'm certain you have many guests requiring your attention. We mustn't monopolize the host." Her grip on Evelyn's arm tightened visibly. "Come, dear." Lord Whitmore was just about to show us the pond. Alexander watched them move away, Constance's false cheerfulness grating against his ears. Evelyn walked with mechanical precision, and Alexander recognized the posture he'd worn it himself many times, the bearing of someone going through practiced motions while their mind screamed silent protest. He should return to his hosting duties. He'd made his polite acknowledgement of an old friend's daughter. That was sufficient. Instead, he found himself tracking their progress across the lawn. 40 minutes passed in grinding tedium. Alexander made the required circuit of his guests, accepting compliments about Weatherby's grounds, deflecting matrimonial hints from ambitious mothers, discussing agricultural yields with local landowners. All the while, his attention kept drifting toward Lady Evelyn. Whitmore had positioned himself at her side like a barnacle on a ship's hull, dominating the conversation with self-important observations. Alexander was too distant to hear specific words, but he recognized the pattern Whitmore holding forth, while Evelyn offered brief responses, her shoulders growing progressively more tense. Then Whitmore said something that made Lady Constance laugh, a calculated, tinkling sound, and Evelyn's face went carefully blank. Alexander had seen that expression before, in the mirror during his first year as Duke. It was the look of someone drowning, while everyone around them remarked on the lovely weather. He was moving again before thinking it through, but stopped when he saw Evelyn herself take action. She said something brief to Whitmore and Constance, then turned and walked away toward the rose garden's more secluded paths. Lady Constance's expression transformed in an instant. The sweet smile vanished, replaced by fury so intense it was almost physical. She made a perfunctory excuse to Whitmore and followed Evelyn, her stride purposeful despite the constraints of her fashionable dress. Every instinct Alexander possessed began screaming warnings. The rose garden's layout flashed through his memory, semicircular paths surrounded by high hedges, private alcoves for conversation, a central area visible from the main lawn but far enough to create illusion of seclusion. Edmund had loved that garden, had walked there with his late wife, had taken young Evelyn there to teach her about rose cultivation. Now Constance was following Edmund's daughter into those private spaces, wearing an expression of barely restrained violence. Alexander's measured walk became a swift stride. James appeared at his elbow. "Something's wrong," Alexander said shortly. "I noticed. Should I stay here, make excuses if anyone asks?" Alexander was already moving, cutting across the lawn with single-minded purpose, propriety, and hosting duties forgotten. Behind him, he heard the party continue. Laughter, conversation, the clink of crystal. But ahead, through the gap in the roses, he caught a glimpse of grey silk and purple morning dress. And then, carrying across the garden with shocking clarity, Lady Constance's voice, no longer honey-sweet, but sharp as broken glass. "You forget your place, girl." Alexander broke into a run. Chapter 3. That was your last mistake. The Rose Garden's marble fountain stood at the intersection of 3 gravel paths, positioned where guests could admire it from the main lawn while maintaining the illusion of privacy. Evelyn had sought it instinctively, needing distance from Lord Whitmore's presumptuous comments and the suffocating weight of Constance's expectations. She pressed trembling fingers against the fountain's cool stone edge, focusing on the sound of trickling water, trying to steady her breathing. The afternoon sun caught in the spray, creating tiny rainbows that danced and vanished. Beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the chaos in her chest. "What?" Constance's voice cut through the tranquility like a blade. "Do you think you're doing?" Evelyn didn't turn. "I needed air. You needed air." Constance's footsteps crunched on gravel as she approached, her voice low but venomous. "You walk away from the most advantageous match you're likely to receive, embarrass me in front of the Duke of Wetherby and half of London society, and your explanation is that you needed air? Lord Whitmore is insufferable. Lord Whitmore is perfect." Constance moved into Evelyn's line of sight, her beautiful face twisted with fury, barely contained by social propriety. They were visible from the lawn. Evelyn could see guests milling near the refreshment tables, but far enough that words wouldn't carry. "Wealthy enough to pay off his debts with your inheritance, while leaving me comfortably settled. Desperate enough to overlook your difficult nature. You should be grateful I found anyone willing to take you." The words landed like physical blows, each one designed to wound. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the fountain's edge until her knuckles went white. 6 months of accumulated rage suddenly pressed against her ribs, demanding release. "I won't marry a man who sees me as livestock to be traded." Constance's laugh was sharp and mirthless. "Livestock? You foolish girl. You think you have choices? You think your precious intelligence and your father's outdated notions give you power?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You have nothing. You are nothing without my approval. The law is quite clear on that point." "The law is wrong. The law is reality." Constance's eyes glittered with malice. "And reality is this: you'll marry Lord Whitmore next month, or I'll take alternative measures. I have physicians who will testify to your instability, your hysteria, your dangerous delusions. One signature, Evelyn, and you'll spend the rest of your life in an asylum, staring at walls, while I manage your inheritance as I see fit." The threat wasn't empty. Evelyn had heard stories of inconvenient women disappeared behind asylum walls, declared mad by doctors whose loyalty could be purchased. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear and fury warring for dominance. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." Constance smiled, the expression never reaching her cold eyes. "Your father spoiled you, filled your head with ridiculous ideas about women managing estates and making decisions. But Edmund is dead, and his fantasies died with him. It's time you learned your place." Something inside Evelyn snapped. Perhaps it was the casual cruelty in Constance's voice. Perhaps it was the invocation of her father's name, like a weapon. Perhaps it was simply 6 months of accumulated grief and rage, finally finding their breaking point. "Father would be ashamed of what you've become." The words emerged steadier than Evelyn felt, each syllable weighted with truth. "He married you because he thought you'd be a companion after Mother died. He trusted you, and you've spent 6 months dismantling everything he built, selling off his legacy piece by piece, treating his daughter like property to be liquidated." Constance's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "He would be ashamed," Evelyn repeated, her voice shaking but firm. "And I won't let you destroy what's left of his memory by marrying Lord Whitmore." The slap came without warning. The crack echoed across the garden like a gunshot, sharp and shocking in the genteel afternoon air. Pain exploded across Evelyn's cheek, hot and stinging. Her head snapped to the side from the force of it, and for a moment the world tilted sideways, roses blurring into sky. The fountain's spray suddenly too loud, her father's pocket watch chain cold against her throat where it had twisted with the impact. Time seemed to suspend itself. Evelyn registered details with crystalline clarity. The gasps from nearby guests who'd witnessed the strike, the way sound seemed to fade and then rush back in a wave, the metallic taste of blood where she'd bitten her tongue. Her hand rose slowly to her burning cheek, fingers trembling as they touched the place where Constance's palm had connected. Through watering eyes, she saw guests frozen in various attitudes of shock. Ladies with hands pressed to mouths, gentlemen half turned toward the commotion. Even the servants had stopped moving, creating a tableau of suspended animation. Constance stood before her, chest heaving, her carefully maintained mask of civility completely shattered. Rage contorted her features into something ugly and raw. "You forget your place, girl." She raised her hand again. Evelyn flinched, hating herself for the involuntary response, but unable to stop it. She braced for the second blow, closing her eyes. It never came. Instead, she heard a sharp intake of breath from Constance, followed by a voice so cold it seemed to lower the temperature of the entire garden. "That was your last mistake." Evelyn's eyes flew open. The Duke of Wetherby stood between her and Constance, his hand locked around her stepmother's wrist, stopping the descending slap mid-swing. His grip appeared almost casual, but Constance's face had gone pale, suggesting the strength behind it was anything but gentle. The crowd that had been forming at a distance suddenly pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle of a duke intervening in a family dispute. Evelyn could see their faces: shock, curiosity, gleeful scandal. The moment would be dissected in drawing rooms across London by evening. "Your Grace," Constance's voice emerged, strangled, her social instincts struggling to reassert control. "This is a family matter. The girl is hysterical, ungrateful. She needs discipline." "What she needs," Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority despite its quiet delivery, "is protection from you." He released Constance's wrist with obvious distaste, then turned to Evelyn. His grey eyes softened fractionally as he took in her tear-stained face and trembling form. "Lady Evelyn, would you do me the honor of joining me for tea? I have matters to discuss regarding your father's estate." Evelyn opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Her cheek throbbed, her mind spun. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't intervene in domestic disputes. They certainly didn't publicly challenge the guardians of young ladies, no matter the provocation. Before she could formulate a response, Alexander turned back to address the assembled crowd. His voice carried across the garden with absolute clarity, brooking no argument. "Lady Constance, you will leave my property immediately. Lady Evelyn is now under my protection. Her belongings will be collected from Hargrave House tomorrow." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible, even over the fountain's splash. This was more than intervention. This was a public claiming of responsibility, nearly scandalous in its implications. Evelyn felt the weight of dozens of eyes, heard the whispers beginning like wind through leaves. "You cannot simply—" Constance's composure cracked completely. "She's my stepdaughter. Legally, I am her guardian until she marries or reaches her majority. You have no right. My solicitor will contact you regarding the legality of your guardianship." Alexander's tone suggested the conversation was finished. "Given what I've just witnessed, I suspect the courts will have questions about your fitness for that role. I suggest you gather your own counsel. Good day, madam." He offered his arm to Evelyn with the same formal courtesy he might extend to a queen. "Lady Evelyn?" Evelyn stared at his outstretched arm as if it were a lifeline thrown to someone drowning, which, perhaps it was. Her entire world had just shifted on its axis in the space of minutes. Humiliation warred with relief, terror with gratitude. She was ruined. No respectable family would receive her after this scandal. But she was also free, or as close to free as a woman in her position could be. Her hand, still trembling, reached for his arm. The moment her fingers touched his sleeve, she felt the trembling worsen, her entire body beginning to shake with delayed shock. "Steady," Alexander murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Just a few steps. You can do this." They walked through the crowd together. Every face turned toward them, some shocked, some delighted by the gossip, some openly disapproving. Evelyn kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look at the judgment in their expressions. Her cheek burned, her legs felt unsteady, but Alexander's arm remained solid beneath her hand, an anchor in chaos. She glanced back once, unable to help herself. Constance stood alone by the fountain, fury and calculation warring on her face. But beyond her, half hidden behind a rose trellis, stood Beatrice. Her stepsister's expression held something Evelyn had never seen there before. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Beatrice offered the smallest of nods before looking away. Then they passed through the French doors into Wetherby's cool interior, and the garden party's noise faded behind them. Evelyn had stepped from one world into something entirely unknown. As the reality of what had just happened began to settle over her like a weight, she realized with dizzy certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 4. Sanctuary and questions. The Duke's private study was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with volumes that showed the wear of actual reading rather than decorative display. A massive desk dominated one corner, its surface organized with military precision, but Alexander guided Evelyn past it to a pair of wingback chairs positioned before an unlit fireplace. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. Evelyn sat with rigid formality, her spine not touching the chair's back, hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The trembling that had started in the garden had worsened, spreading through her limbs until she felt as though she might shatter into pieces. Alexander moved to a sideboard without speaking, the clink of crystal against crystal oddly soothing in the quiet room. He poured amber liquid from a decanter brandy by its color and returned with 2 glasses. One he kept, the other he offered to Evelyn with a slight nod. She took it with both hands, needing them both to hide the shaking. The glass felt solid and real against her palms, grounding her in a moment that still seemed impossible. Had the last hour actually happened? Had a duke truly intervened in her stepmother's discipline, claimed her protection publicly, brought her into his private study as if such actions were perfectly ordinary? The brandy burned going down, but the warmth spreading through her chest was steadying. Alexander settled into the opposite chair, notably not behind his desk where authority would tower over her, but across from her at equal height. He didn't speak immediately, didn't rush to fill the silence with platitudes or demands for explanation. He simply sat, his own glass cradled loosely in one hand, and waited. The patience undid something in Evelyn's chest. "Thank you." Her voice emerged barely steady, roughened by tears she refused to shed in front of a stranger. "But I don't understand why you intervened. You don't know me. We've never been formally introduced. My family troubles are hardly—" "I knew your father." The simple statement stopped her mid-sentence. Evelyn looked up, really looked at the Duke for the first time since entering the study. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 or 31, with dark hair showing premature silver at the temples. His features were aristocratic but lived in, marked by responsibility rather than dissipation. Grey eyes regarded her with unexpected gentleness. "Edmund and I served together on several parliamentary committees," Alexander continued. "Agricultural reform, mostly. Tenant rights. He had radical ideas about estate management, treating farmers as partners rather than subjects. I was new to my title, drowning in obligations I'd never expected to inherit. Your father—" He paused, something like grief flickering across his features. "He helped me navigate those early days, offered advice without condescension, treated me as a man rather than merely a duke." Evelyn's throat tightened. She could picture it perfectly, her father, with his gentle wisdom, his instinct for seeing the person behind the title. "He spoke of you constantly," Alexander said, and now there was warmth in his voice. "His brilliant daughter, who understood estate management better than most men, who rode like a centaur, who laughed," he said, "like her mother did, like joy itself." The tears Evelyn had been fighting broke through her defenses. They spilled hot down her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to contain the sob building in her chest. "I haven't laughed like that in a very long time." "I know." Alexander's voice was quiet but firm. "I've attended functions where you were present these past 6 months. The Thornbury Ball in July, Lady Hertford's musicale in August, the Pembroke dinner last month. Every time, I saw a little less of the person your father described. You were fading, Lady Evelyn, disappearing inside yourself." Evelyn stared at him, shocked. "You noticed me? How could I not? Edmund spoke of you so often that when I saw you at these events, I recognized the disconnect immediately. The vibrant woman he described didn't match the silent, subdued figure, moving through ballrooms like a ghost." His jaw tightened. "Today, when she struck you in front of half of London society, some things cannot be tolerated. I don't care what justifications she might offer, no person deserves that treatment." Something in Evelyn rebelled against the sympathy in his voice, against being seen as pitiable. Her defenses rose even as more tears threatened. "You don't know me, Your Grace. You don't know what led to that moment. For all you know, I deserved." "Don't." The word cracked like a whip, sharp enough to stop her cold. Alexander leaned forward, intensity radiating from him. "Don't you dare defend her cruelty. Don't internalize the narrative that her abuse was somehow justified by your behavior. That is what abusers do, make their victims believe they earned the punishment. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Evelyn clutched her brandy glass, unable to meet his eyes, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with scandal and everything to do with being truly seen. Finally, she managed the question that had been building since they left the garden. What happens now? I'm ruined, aren't I? Living here, even temporarily. My reputation, my aunt, Lady Margaret Ashford, resides in the East Wing. Alexander's tone shifted back to practical, giving Evelyn space to regain her composure. She's eccentric and politically outspoken, which is why she prefers the countryside to London. But her presence ensures propriety. She witnessed the entire scene in the garden. I saw her in the crowd. She'll support your version of events, should anyone question the circumstances. Evelyn's mind spun, trying to process the implications. A chaperone, a witness to Constance's violence. The Duke had thought this through with remarkable speed. There's more you should know. Alexander set down his glass, his expression serious. I made inquiries after your father's death. The terms of his will, Lady Constance's legal maneuvering, it's all questionable at best, fraudulent at worst. You investigated? Evelyn couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Your father asked me to look after you if anything happened to him. We were discussing estate succession over dinner one evening, about 3 months before his death. He mentioned his concerns about Constance, about ensuring you'd be protected. Alexander's expression turned rueful. I assured him such precautions were unnecessary, that he'd live another 30 years at least, but I promised that if anything did happen, I'd make certain you were cared for. I didn't realize how literal that request would become. The revelation settled over Evelyn like a weight. Her father had known, had seen through Constance's performance, had tried to protect his daughter even beyond death. Stay here as my guest, Alexander said. My solicitor, Mr. Henry Blackwell, is one of the finest legal minds in England. He'll review your situation thoroughly. We'll determine how to break Constance's control legally. The guardianship provisions in your father's will may be challengeable, especially given what I witnessed today. It was everything Evelyn had dreamed of during 6 months of captivity: rescue, legal assistance, escape from Constance's cruelty. So why did panic flutter in her chest like a trapped bird? I won't be a charity case, Your Grace. The words emerged more forcefully than she'd intended, but she couldn't take them back. Or a project to manage. I've had enough of being managed. If I'm simply trading one form of control for another, fair enough. Alexander's response was immediate, without defensiveness or offense. Then, let's call this a strategic alliance. You need legal protection and physical distance from your stepmother. I need. He paused, and for the first time, something like humor crossed his features. Frankly, I could use an intelligent conversation partner who isn't trying to manipulate me into marriage. The season is deadly dull. The unexpected honesty startled a sound from Evelyn's throat, not quite a laugh, but close. A tiny, surprised exhale that held the ghost of amusement. Alexander's slight smile transformed his entire countenance. There, your father would be pleased. The tears returned, but these were different, softer, tinged with something other than grief. Evelyn wiped at her eyes with shaking fingers, simultaneously embarrassed and strangely relieved. Practical matters, Alexander continued, his tone brisk but kind. You'll have your own suite in the guest wing, complete privacy, freedom to roam the estate and grounds as you wish. The library is extensive. Father was a collector. You're welcome to any volumes that interest you. I can read what I choose. Why on earth wouldn't you be able to? Alexander looked genuinely puzzled. Constance believed novels were frivolous and political texts unsuitable for women. His expression darkened. Then you have 6 months of reading to catch up on. I'll have Mrs. Hewitt, my housekeeper, show you the library after you're settled. They discussed logistics with surprising ease. Her belongings would be collected tomorrow. Correspondence with Mr. Blackwell would begin immediately. Lady Margaret would be informed and would likely demand an introduction at dinner. Throughout the conversation, Evelyn felt the tight band around her chest gradually loosening. As she rose to leave, her hand unconsciously touched her cheek. The skin was tender, likely bruising. She winced. Alexander noticed immediately. Mrs. Hewitt will bring a cold compress and perhaps some witch hazel for the swelling. He moved to the door, opening it to reveal a comfortable-looking woman in her 50s waiting in the hallway. Mrs. Hewitt, Lady Evelyn will be staying as our guest. Would you see her settled in the blue suite? And please bring something for her cheek." The housekeeper's warm brown eyes took in Evelyn's tear-stained face and bruised cheek without judgment. "Of course, Your Grace. Come along, dear. Let's get you comfortable." The guest suite was larger than Evelyn's room at Hargrave House, decorated in shades of blue and cream that caught the afternoon light. French doors opened onto a small balcony overlooking the gardens, the same gardens where her world had shattered and reformed in the span of minutes. Mrs. Hewitt bustled about, opening curtains, checking that fresh water filled the washing basin, promising to return with the compress and some tea. Her kindness was so matter-of-fact, so different from the cold efficiency of Constance's servants, that Evelyn felt tears threatening again. When she was finally alone, Evelyn moved to the window, looking out over manicured lawns and geometric rose beds. From this height, she could see the marble fountain where Constance had struck her. Guests still milled about below, no doubt discussing the scandal in excited whispers. She pulled her father's pocket watch from beneath her bodice, where it hung on its chain. The silver was warm from her skin. She opened it, reading the inscription that had become a talisman. "Time reveals all truth, my darling girl." "What truth will this reveal, Papa?" she whispered to the empty room. That she'd escaped one prison only to enter another? That the Duke's kindness came with expectations she couldn't meet? Or perhaps something else entirely, that freedom was possible, that she possessed strength she'd forgotten, that her father's faith in her wasn't misplaced? Outside, the sun began its descent toward evening, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour, time moving forward, revealing its truths whether she was ready or not. Evelyn closed the watch and held it against her heart, feeling its steady tick-tick-tick, and for the first time in 6 months, allowed herself to hope. Chapter 5. The Rules Have Changed. Day 3. Evelyn woke to birdsong rather than Constance's sharp rapping on her bedroom door. For a disoriented moment, she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling was wrong, painted cream instead of pale rose, and sunlight streamed through unfamiliar windows. Then memory returned in a rush: the garden party, the slap, the Duke's intervention. Wetherby. She was at Wetherby, and no one was coming to inspect her appearance or dictate her morning schedule. The realization felt too large to contain in her chest. She dressed herself, fumbling slightly with the back fastenings, but managing, and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and warm bread. The breakfast room was smaller than Hargrave's formal dining hall, painted butter yellow and flooded with morning light. A sideboard held covered dishes, eggs, bacon, toast, jam, fruit, and no one to tell her what she was permitted to eat. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the array of choices. At Hargrave House, Constance had controlled every meal. Ladies ate sparingly, took small portions, avoided anything too rich or indulgent. But here, she took 2 slices of bacon, then a third, added eggs and toast with butter, real butter, not the thin scraping Constance permitted, poured coffee and added cream until it was the exact shade she preferred, sat at the table with her scandalously full plate and ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was the most delicious breakfast of her life. Day 5. The library was a cathedral of books, 3 stories tall, with a gallery running around the upper levels and wheeled ladders for reaching the highest shelves. Afternoon light poured through tall windows, illuminating thousands of leather spines in every color imaginable. Evelyn stood in the center, turning slowly, overwhelmed by the sheer abundance. At Hargrave House, she'd been forbidden all but the most innocuous novels and household management texts. But here, she ran her fingers along a shelf, reading titles that made her heart race: political philosophy, scientific treatises, history volumes banned in Constance's household for being too advanced or unsuitable. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a copy of Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, a book she'd heard of but never dared request. Radical choice for a Tuesday afternoon. Evelyn spun, clutching the book to her chest. Alexander stood in the doorway, an amused smile softening his usually serious features. He'd shed his formal coat, working in shirt sleeves and waistcoat like a man comfortable in his own home. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to presume." "You're welcome to any book in this library," he interrupted gently. "That's what they're for. Reading, not decorating." He crossed to where she stood, examining the shelf she'd been perusing. "Wollstonecraft. My mother was fond of her work. Scandalous in her time, of course, but Mother said the scandal was proof she'd struck a nerve." "Your mother sounds remarkable." She was. Something sad crossed his features. She died when I was 12. Influenza. But she left her mark on this library. Most of the political philosophy is her collection. They fell into conversation then, moving from Wollstonecraft to other philosophers, discovering a shared fascination with how ideas shaped societies. When Alexander mentioned the Tudor period, Evelyn's enthusiasm got the better of her caution. Catherine of Aragon was the true political genius of that marriage, she argued, her eyes bright with passion. She'd been trained since childhood in statecraft. She served as regent, while Henry was fighting in France successfully, I might add. Her political acumen far exceeded his. But without Thomas Cromwell's administrative reforms, England's break with Rome would have been chaos. Alexander leaned against the desk, clearly enjoying himself. He transformed the entire governmental structure, created the modern bureaucratic state, by destroying monasteries and displacing thousands of people dependent on monastic charity, by ending corruption and redirecting resources to more efficient uses. They argued for an hour, voices rising with enthusiasm, neither giving ground. Alexander found himself watching her face, more than tracking the actual debate, the way her eyes lit up when making a point, how she gestured emphatically with her hands, the color that had returned to her cheeks. She's been hiding this, he thought, or it's been hidden from her. The woman before him bore little resemblance to the ghost from the garden party. This was the daughter Edmund had described, brilliant, passionate, fully alive. The conversation drifted naturally into more personal territory as the afternoon waned. They'd migrated to chairs by the window, the debate giving way to easier exchange. "Why have you never married, Your Grace?" The question emerged before Evelyn could stop it. "Forgive me, that's terribly forward." "No, it's a fair question." Alexander stared out at the gardens, his expression thoughtful. "Because every woman presented to me sees the title and the estate. They calculate worth in terms of properties and income. I wanted—" He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. "Someone who sees you," Evelyn finished quietly. Their eyes met. The silence stretched between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to acknowledge. Alexander looked away first, clearing his throat. "We should dress for dinner. Lady Margaret arrived this afternoon. She'll want to meet you." Lady Margaret's assessment. Lady Margaret Ashford was a force of nature compressed into an elegant woman of perhaps 68, silver hair piled fashionably high, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a spine that suggested she'd never bowed to convention in her life. She took tea with Evelyn in the morning room while Alexander attended to estate business. "So," Margaret said without preamble, adding sugar to her tea with brisk efficiency, "my nephew has avoided entanglement for 6 years. Then he publicly claims a young woman's protection in a manner so scandalous it's been the talk of every drawing-room in London. Tell me, Lady Evelyn, what should I make of this?" Evelyn set down her cup carefully. "Your nephew is honoring a promise to my late father." Margaret's gaze was penetrating. "And the way he watches you at dinner is also about honoring promises." Heat flooded Evelyn's cheeks before she could control it. Margaret's laugh was delighted. "Good. He needs someone with spine. Too many insipid girls have bored him to tears, all simpering and, 'Yes, Your Grace, and how wise you are, Your Grace.' Nauseating." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "But you should know, London will be vicious about this. The gossips are sharpening their knives as we speak. Are you prepared?" Evelyn thought of Constance's cruelty, the 6 months of systematic dismantling of her spirit. Lady Constance was vicious too. "I survived her." "Indeed you did. I witnessed that scene in the garden, you know. Ghastly woman. Striking you in public like that." Margaret's expression hardened. "I've already begun spreading my version of events through my correspondence network. By the time I'm finished, Constance Hargrave will find herself persona non grata in every respectable household." "You don't have to." "Oh, but I do. No one strikes a young woman in my nephew's garden and escapes consequences." Margaret smiled, the expression both warm and slightly dangerous. "Besides, I like you. You argue politics at dinner and don't pretend to be less intelligent than you are. That's refreshingly honest." Letters from Constance. The letters began arriving on the 10th day. Alexander's butler, Morrison, brought them to Evelyn in the library where she'd been reading, his expression carefully neutral, but his disapproval evident in the stiff way he held the envelope. The first was bad enough. Constance demanding Evelyn's immediate return, threatening legal action, claiming impropriety. The second was worse, filled with detailed accusations about Evelyn's abandoned behavior. and predictions of social ruin. But the third letter made Evelyn's hands shake. You think the Duke wants you for yourself? He pities you, nothing more. A charity project to assuage his guilt over your father's death. When he tires of your presence, and he will, you'll be ruined and alone. No respectable man will have you. You'll have nothing. Come home now, and I'll consider forgiving this foolishness. Defy me further, and I'll ensure your destruction is complete. Evelyn tried to hide the letter when Alexander entered the library, but her distress must have shown on her face. What's wrong? He crossed to her immediately. Nothing, just correspondence. Evelyn. His use of her first name was deliberate, gentle. Show me. She handed over all 3 letters, watching his expression darken as he read. The fury that crossed his features was cold and controlled, somehow more intimidating than rage would have been. She's desperate, he said finally. That makes her dangerous but also careless. He looked at Evelyn, his grey eyes intense. You know none of this is true? The things she's claiming about my motivations? Evelyn wanted to believe him, but doubt poisoned her certainty. How can I know? I've been here less than 2 weeks. Perhaps she's right. Perhaps I'm simply a duty you've undertaken. No. Alexander caught her hand, the first time he'd deliberately touched her since that day in the garden. His grip was warm and solid. You are not a duty. You are not a charity case. You are a guest in my home because I respect your father's memory and because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I find your company valuable. Is that clear? Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm summoning Mr. Blackwell tomorrow. We'll address Constance's claims legally and permanently. He released her hand, though something in his expression suggested he'd rather not. In the meantime, ignore these letters. She's trying to manipulate you. Don't let her. Evening in the garden. Dusk painted the rose garden in shades of amber and violet. Alexander and Evelyn walked the gravel paths together, their conversation having evolved over 2 weeks from careful courtesy to genuine ease. Tell me about your plans for Hargrave, Alexander said. When you regain control. Evelyn's face lit up. Modernize the tenant farms. Implement crop rotation. Father and I designed a system before he died. Improve housing. The cottages need repair, but Constance refused to authorize spending. And I want to establish a school for the tenant children. Basic literacy and mathematics. Alexander listened intently, asking questions that demonstrated real interest rather than polite attention. They discussed drainage systems and livestock breeding, agricultural innovation and social responsibility. The conversation flowed naturally into more personal territory. Who are you, Lady Evelyn, when no one is controlling you? The question stopped her mid-step. She looked at him in the fading light. This man who'd become unexpectedly important in such a short time. I don't know, she admitted. I'm discovering that now. It's terrifying and exhilarating. Perhaps that's the most important journey, Alexander said quietly. Discovering who you are outside others' expectations. You've done that, haven't you? Defied expectations. His laugh was self-deprecating. I've avoided them. That's different from defying them. Perhaps less brave. They'd stopped walking. In the dimming light, they stood close enough that Evelyn could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The awareness between them felt almost physical, charged, inevitable, terrifying. I should go in, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's getting dark. Alexander let her go, though every instinct screamed to reach for her, to close the distance between them. Of course. Good night, Lady Evelyn. Evelyn, she corrected softly. Just Evelyn. He watched her disappear into the house, his hands clenched at his sides. Later that night, Evelyn sat at the writing desk in her room, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Her father's pocket watch lay open beside her, its steady ticking a comfort in the quiet. I could love him, she thought. I might already, but how do I know it's real and not just gratitude, not just safety? In his study 3 floors below, Alexander poured whiskey he didn't drink and stared at the fire. This wasn't supposed to happen. Protecting her, yes, honoring Edmund's request. But this is dangerous. Neither slept well that night, both acutely aware that something had shifted, something that couldn't easily be shifted back. Chapter 6. Constance's Gambit. The morning had begun with such promise. Evelyn sat across from Alexander at the small breakfast table, debating the merits of Gothic versus Romanesque architecture with the easy familiarity they'd developed over 3 weeks. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the steam rising from their coffee cups. and for a moment, Evelyn allowed herself to forget that this peaceful existence was temporary. Then Mrs. Hewitt appeared in the doorway, her comfortable face creased with disapproval. "Your Grace, Lady Constance Hargrave has arrived, with Lord Whitmore and Sir Edmund Worthing." She paused, her tone making clear what she thought of such company. "They're requesting an immediate audience. They say it's a legal matter." Alexander's expression hardened instantly. He set down his coffee with careful precision, the kind of deliberate movement that suggested controlled fury. "Show them to the formal drawing room. Ask Lady Margaret and Mr. Worthington to join us, and Mrs. Hewitt ensure several staff members are present. I want witnesses." Evelyn's hands had gone cold. "Sir Edmund Worthing? The magistrate? It seems your stepmother has escalated her campaign." Alexander's voice was calm, but his eyes blazed. "Are you prepared for this?" "No," every instinct screamed. "Run, hide, let someone else fight this battle." But Evelyn thought of the past 3 weeks, the books she'd read, the rides she'd taken, the person she'd been rediscovering. She thought of her father's pocket watch and its inscription, "Time reveals all truth." Perhaps it was time to reveal hers. "Yes," she said, rising. "I'm ready." The formal drawing room was deliberately intimidating. High ceilings, portraits of stern Ashford ancestors lining the walls, furniture arranged to emphasize the Duke's authority. Constance stood near the fireplace in a gown of mourning purple that somehow managed to look triumphant rather than somber. Lord Whitmore lingered by the window, his handsome face carefully arranged in an expression of concern, and Sir Edmund Worthing, a portly man of perhaps 55, held a leather document case with an air of officious importance. Lady Margaret entered behind Evelyn and Alexander, taking a seat with the regal bearing of someone who'd attended court presentations. James Worthington, Alexander's estate manager, positioned himself near the door. 2 footmen and Mrs. Hewitt found reasons to remain within earshot. "Lady Constance." Alexander's greeting was glacial. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "Your Grace, I come with the heaviest of hearts." Constance's voice trembled with what might have been genuine emotion if one didn't know her. "My stepdaughter's welfare is my paramount concern. Recent events have made it clear that she requires specialized care I've been unable to provide." She nodded to Sir Edmund, who opened his document case with bureaucratic precision. "I have here," the magistrate began, "sworn testimony from Dr. Bartholomew Pike regarding Lady Evelyn Hargrave's mental condition. The doctor has documented several episodes of hysteria, irrational behavior, and concerning instability over the past 6 months." Evelyn felt the room tilt sideways. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Additionally," Constance added, her voice dripping false concern, "Lord Whitmore can attest to her erratic behavior at your own garden party. The poor dear is not well. She needs rest, medical supervision, protection from herself." She turned tearful eyes to Evelyn. "Come home, darling. Let me care for you properly." The performance was masterful. If Evelyn hadn't lived through 6 months of Constance's cruelty, she might have believed it herself. Lord Whitmore cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I offered Lady Evelyn marriage, stability. She refused, in a manner that was concerning. Her behavior that day was quite irrational." Sir Edmund adjusted his spectacles, examining Evelyn with clinical detachment. "Lady Evelyn, these are serious allegations. Given your father's recent death and the strain of grief, perhaps it would be best if you return to your stepmother's care until your condition stabilizes." Victorian law pressed down on Evelyn like a physical weight. Women could be committed on far less evidence than this. A doctor's testimony, a concerned guardian, a magistrate's approval that was all it took to disappear behind asylum walls. Alexander moved to speak, his face dark with fury, but Evelyn stood first. "No," she said clearly, "I will speak for myself." The room went silent. Alexander's eyes met hers, a question in them. She gave the smallest nod. "I can do this. I must do this." "Sir Edmund," Evelyn began, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins, "you mentioned Dr. Bartholomew Pike. I'm curious, when did Dr. Pike examine me?" The magistrate consulted his papers. According to these records, he documented episodes on March 14th, April 2nd, and May 27th. "Dr. Pike has never examined me." Evelyn's voice grew stronger. "In fact, Dr. Pike was dismissed from medical practice 2 years ago for falsifying patient records. There was a hearing before the Royal College of Physicians. I can provide documentation if you'd like to verify this." Sir Edmund's face reddened. He shuffled through his papers with increasing agitation. As for the alleged episode on March 14th, Evelyn continued, I was in London that day, meeting with my father's solicitor, Mr. Edmund Blackwell, to review estate documents. We met from 10 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. Mr. Blackwell can testify to my complete lucidity during that meeting. April 2nd, I was at church with my father. He was still alive then. The vicar can confirm my presence and comportment. May 27th, Evelyn's voice hardened, was 2 weeks after my father's funeral. I spent that day in the Hargrave Chapel, alone, grieving. If that constitutes an episode, then grief itself must be classified as madness. She turned to face Constance directly. Each incident you fabricated, I can refute with witnesses and documentation. Would you like me to continue? Constance's mask slipped fractionally, a flash of pure hatred, before she smoothed it away. You see, Sir Edmund, she's become confrontational, defensive. These are symptoms. No, Evelyn cut her off. These are the responses of a sane woman defending herself against false accusations. She shifted her attention to Lord Whitmore, who'd gone pale. Lord Whitmore, what did Lady Constance promise you? Whitmore's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Was it half my inheritance? Evelyn pressed. Or just enough to clear your gambling debts at White's? Be specific, please. I'm genuinely curious what price she put on my freedom. I don't. That's not, Whitmore stammered, his face flushing crimson. Evelyn reached into her reticule and produced a folded letter. This is correspondence between Lady Constance and Lord Whitmore, dated 3 weeks before the garden party. In it, they discussed terms of a marriage arrangement. Specifically, Lord Whitmore would receive £40,000 upon our marriage, enough to satisfy his creditors, while Lady Constance would maintain control of the remainder of my inheritance through her guidance of her new son-in-law. She held the letter out to Sir Edmund. I obtained this from a maid, Lady Constance dismissed from Hargrave House for the crime of treating me with kindness. The woman kept it as insurance. The room erupted. Constance's composure shattered completely. You little, how dare you? How dare I what? Evelyn's voice rose. How dare I defend myself against fraud? Against being sold like property? Against false imprisonment? The drawing-room doors opened, and a distinguished gentleman in his 60s entered, carrying an even larger document case. Alexander's solicitor, Mr. Henry Blackwell, surveyed the scene with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Your Grace, my apologies for the delay. The documentation took longer to compile than expected. He nodded politely to the room. Sir Edmund, Lady Constance, how fortuitous that you're all here. Blackwell opened his case with deliberate precision, removing several thick folders. I've spent the past 3 weeks investigating Lady Constance's management of the Hargrave estate. The findings are illuminating. He addressed Sir Edmund directly, magistrate to magistrate. Lady Constance has sold 3 parcels of estate land without proper authorization. She forged Lady Evelyn's signature on documents transferring control of tenant rents to her personal accounts. She dismissed the estate's longtime solicitor, myself, and replaced him with Mr. Thaddeus Pike, who coincidentally is Dr. Bartholomew Pike's brother. This is preposterous, Constance tried to interject. I have bank records, Blackwell continued implacably. Forged signatures examined by handwriting experts, testimony from dismissed servants. Lady Constance has embezzled approximately £80,000 from the Hargrave estate over the past 6 months. The sum was staggering. Even Sir Edmund looked shocked. Furthermore, Blackwell added, I have evidence that Lady Constance attempted to have Lady Evelyn's entire inheritance transferred to her personal control, bypassing the terms of Lord Hargrave's will entirely. This constitutes fraud on a significant scale. Constance's face had gone from red to white to mottled purple. Cornered, she did what cornered animals do, she lashed out with her last weapon. Even if this is all true, and I dispute every word, she's still ruined. Constance's voice rose to a near shriek. Living here unchaperoned with the Duke, her reputation is destroyed. No respectable man will have her. She'll be a social pariah. The threat hung in the air, and Evelyn felt its weight. In Victorian society, reputation was everything for a woman. Constance was right about that, at least. Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Lady Evelyn has been chaperoned by my aunt, Lady Margaret Ashford, who resides in the East Wing. Propriety has been maintained at all times. Lady Margaret rose, her aristocratic bearing making even Constance look shabby by comparison. Indeed. I've been in residence since the day after that disgraceful scene in the garden. I witnessed your assault on Lady Evelyn, Constance. I've documented her exemplary behavior since. Anyone questioning this young woman's virtue will answer to me personally, and I assure you, my social connections make yours look rather provincial, Alexander continued, his voice cold as winter frost. Moreover, Sir Edmund, I suggest you carefully review your association with Lady Constance. Her false testimony today, her fraudulent documents, her attempt to have a sane woman committed these constitute attempted fraud against a peer of the realm. I trust you'll want to distance yourself from such actions. Sir Edmund had gone the colour of old parchment. He gathered his papers with trembling hands. Lady Constance, these are grave accusations against you. Very grave indeed. I shall need to investigate this matter thoroughly. He turned to Evelyn, his earlier condescension replaced by uncomfortable respect. Lady Evelyn, you appear perfectly sound of mind. Remarkably so, under the circumstances. I see no reason for any intervention whatsoever. To Alexander, Your Grace, I apologize profusely for this intrusion. I was misinformed about the situation. See that you inform your colleagues about the actual facts, Alexander said icily. Mr. Blackwell will be filing complaints with the Court of Chancery regarding Lady Constance's financial crimes. I suggest she retain competent counsel. Constance stood trembling with impotent rage. This isn't over. It is. Alexander's voice carried absolute finality. Leave my property. Do not contact Lady Evelyn again. Any communication will go through Mr. Blackwell. If you set foot on Wetherby land again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Lord Whitmore had already fled, his shame evident in his hunched shoulders. Sir Edmund bowed his way out with profuse apologies. Constance stood alone, her schemes in ruins around her. She looked at Evelyn one last time, and for a moment, naked hatred showed in her eyes. Then she turned and swept from the room with what little dignity remained to her. The drawing-room emptied slowly, servants departing, James escorting Mr. Blackwell to review documents, Sir Edmund practically fleeing. Finally, only Evelyn, Alexander, and Lady Margaret remained. Evelyn stood rigid, every muscle locked, processing what had just happened. She'd faced down her greatest fear, stood up to Constance with witnesses. Won. Then her body remembered how to move, and she began trembling violently. Not from fear, from the adrenaline crash, from relief so profound it felt like drowning. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her mouth to contain the sob building in her chest. Alexander moved toward her, then stopped. "May I?" She nodded, unable to speak. He took her hands, proper, supportive, but the intimacy of the gesture made her tears flow faster. His hands were warm and steady, while hers shook. "You were magnificent," he said quietly, his grey eyes intense. "Absolutely magnificent." Lady Margaret's dry voice cut through the moment. "Indeed." Constance never stood a chance against an intelligent woman with documentation. "Well done, my dear." Evelyn's laugh emerged watery and unsteady, but genuine. She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, though Alexander still held the other. But then Constance's final words echoed in her memory, and the laughter died. She was right about one thing. My reputation. I'm ruined, aren't I? Socially? Alexander's grip on her hands tightened. We'll address that. But first, let's secure your future properly. Make your independence legal and unassailable. Evening found Evelyn in the library, curled in her favorite chair by the window. Twilight painted the gardens in shades of purple and gold. She held her father's pocket watch, its familiar weight a comfort. "I did it, Papa," she whispered to the empty room. "I stood up for myself, just like you taught me." A soft knock made her look up. Alexander stood in the doorway, hesitant in a way she'd never seen him. "May I join you?" "Please." He settled into the chair across from hers, and they sat in comfortable silence for a long moment. The quiet between them had changed over 3 weeks from awkward to easy, from careful to companionable. Finally, Alexander spoke. "There's something I need to discuss with you, about your future." Evelyn's heart stumbled in her chest. "My future?" "Yes." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need to talk about what happens next." Chapter 7. The Proposal. 2 days after Constance's defeat, Evelyn found herself in a peculiar limbo. Her stepmother was gone, vanquished legally and socially. Her future stretched before her, uncharted and terrifying in its openness. Yet something felt unfinished, suspended, like a breath held too long. Alexander had been distant since the confrontation, polite at meals, cordial when they passed in hallways, but the easy companionship they'd built over 3 weeks had evaporated. He no longer sought her company in the library. He made excuses when she suggested walks. His chair at dinner sat farther from hers than it once had, as if he'd deliberately repositioned the furniture. Evelyn told herself she understood. She'd brought scandal to his household, complicated his orderly life, dragged him into legal battles with her family. Of course, he regretted his intervention. Of course, he was counting the days until propriety allowed him to send her home with relief. The logic was sound. The ache in her chest suggested otherwise. Lady Margaret found her in the garden on a grey afternoon that threatened rain. Evelyn had been walking the paths aimlessly, trying to order her chaotic thoughts into something resembling a plan. "My nephew," Margaret announced without preamble, "is being an idiot." Evelyn turned, startled. "I beg your pardon?" "Alexander, an idiot." Margaret settled onto a stone bench with the air of someone preparing for a lengthy conversation. "Come, sit. We need to talk." Evelyn obeyed, bewildered. "Has something happened?" "Nothing has happened, which is precisely the problem." Margaret fixed her with those sharp blue eyes. "He's in love with you, dear. Terrified of it, but in love nonetheless. And rather than behaving like a rational adult, he's avoiding you like a schoolboy with his first infatuation." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. "That's not he can't be." "Oh, but he is. I've known that boy since he was in leading strings. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "The question is, what do you feel?" Evelyn's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know. Gratitude, certainly. He saved me from Constance, gave me sanctuary, helped me find my strength again. And attraction, I'd be lying if I denied that. But how do I separate gratitude from genuine feeling? How do I know I'm not simply clinging to my rescuer?" "You think love is always clear?" Margaret laughed, but not unkindly. "It's messy, complicated, inconvenient. But answer me this. When you imagine your future, truly imagine it, is he in it?" The question pierced through Evelyn's careful defenses. She closed her eyes, picturing the years ahead, managing Hargrave estate, implementing her father's plans, building the school she dreamed of, and in every image, Alexander was there, not hovering or controlling, but beside her, discussing crop rotation, debating philosophy, laughing at her terrible puns. "Yes," she whispered, "but I need to know I can stand alone before I choose to stand with someone. Does that make sense?" Margaret's smile was approving. "Perfect sense. Smart girl. Tell him that." "Tell him what?" "That I might love him, but I'm not sure." "That sounds honest." Margaret rose, patting Evelyn's shoulder. "Tell him exactly what you told me. The boy needs to hear it." In his study, Alexander stared at the same contract he'd been attempting to read for the past hour. The words blurred together, meaningless. His mind was elsewhere, in the library where Evelyn sat reading, in the garden where she walked, in every space of Weatherby that had become inexplicably brighter with her presence. "You're going to lose her if you don't act." Alexander looked up to find James Worthington leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing an expression of exasperation. "I don't know what you mean," Alexander said, returning his attention to the contract he wasn't reading. "Don't insult my intelligence." James crossed to the desk. "You've been avoiding her for 2 days. She thinks you regret helping her, that you want her gone. I'm giving her space. You're being a coward." James's tone was blunt. "You care for her. It's written all over your face every time she enters a room. But you're so terrified she might say yes out of obligation that you're ensuring she'll leave without knowing how you feel." Alexander set down the contract. "What if she does say yes out of gratitude, out of thinking she has no other choice? I won't trap her in a marriage of obligation. Then give her a choice that requires neither obligation nor gratitude." James leaned forward. "Be honest. Lay out terms that ensure her freedom, and trust her intelligence enough to make her own decision." Evening brought clearing skies and golden light slanting through the rose garden. Alexander found Evelyn there, sitting on a bench in the section where they'd first really talked, far from the fountain where Constance had struck her. This was their space, filled with better memories. "May I join you?" Evelyn looked up. Surprise, and something else, hope, flickering across her features. "Of course." He sat, leaving careful distance between them. They were both silent for a long moment, the awkwardness of the past 2 days settling over them like fog. I need to say something, Alexander finally began, his voice unsteady in a way she'd never heard. And I need you to listen completely before you respond. Can you do that? Evelyn nodded, her heart hammering. When I intervened at the garden party, I told myself it was duty to your father, honor, the right thing to do. He stared at his hands. That wasn't the only reason. He forced himself to meet her eyes. These weeks with you, conversations, debates, watching you rediscover yourself, have shown me what was missing from my life. Not a wife in the traditional sense, not an ornament or a duty, but a partner, an equal. Someone who challenges me and makes me laugh and sees past the title to the person underneath. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but Alexander held up a hand gently. Please, let me finish before I lose courage. She nodded again, tears already gathering. I'm not asking you to marry me because you need protection. I'm not asking because society expects it or because it would solve your reputation concerns. His voice grew more intense. I'm asking because in these weeks, I've discovered who I am when I'm with you. Someone better, someone real, someone who laughs and argues and feels things I'd forgotten I was capable of feeling. He leaned forward, his expression fierce with sincerity. But I won't ask you to trade one form of captivity for another. I won't be another person controlling your life, making your choices for you. What are you saying? Evelyn whispered. I'm saying if you're uncertain, we'll wait. Months, years if necessary. The words came faster now, as if he'd rehearsed them. You'll return to Hargrave Estate. We'll ensure your legal independence first, your name on the deeds, your control absolute. You'll have a season in London, or several seasons, meeting people, experiencing freedom, discovering who you are without anyone dictating your choices. His voice dropped. If, after you've lived independently, made your own choices, discovered who Lady Evelyn Hargrave truly is, if then you choose me, I'll know it's real. I'll know you're choosing me, not safety, not gratitude, me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. And if I discover I don't want this? Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. Don't want us. Alexander's expression showed the pain that question cost him. Then I'll wish you joy and mean it. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks. How can I know if what I feel is love or just the first kindness I've experienced in years? How can I trust my own heart when it's been so starved for affection? Alexander shifted closer but didn't touch her. Time, distance, perspective. That's how you'll know. Live your life. Build your dreams. If what you feel for me is real, it will survive the distance. If it's gratitude, it will fade when you're strong enough not to need anyone. Will you wait? The question emerged, barely audible. However long it takes. Evelyn's mind spun. She thought of Lady Margaret's question. When you imagine your future, is he in it? She thought of her father's words about being brave. She thought of the woman she was becoming, the one who'd stood up to Constance, who'd reclaimed her voice, who was learning to trust her own judgment. I need to do this, she said finally. Live alone, manage my estate, prove to myself I can stand on my own. Not because I don't care for you, but because I need to know who I am first. I understand, but Alexander, his name on her lips for the first time, felt intimate, significant. He looked at her with such intensity it stole her breath. I think I'm already choosing you. I just need to be sure I'm choosing from strength, not fear. Relief flooded his features so completely it was almost painful to witness. That's all I ask. The certainty that comes from freedom, not necessity. They stood simultaneously, drawn together by invisible threads. The space between them felt charged, electric, impossible to maintain. Evelyn rose slightly on her toes. Alexander bent toward her. Their lips met softly, tentative, questioning, a promise more than passion. The kiss was brief, ending almost before it began, but it left them both shaken. When they parted, Evelyn pressed her fingers to her lips, eyes wide. Go, Alexander whispered, though his hand had found hers and seemed reluctant to let go. Discover yourself. Build your life. I'll be here when you're ready. The practical arrangements happened with surprising speed. Mr. Blackwell had prepared documents transferring Hargrave Estate entirely to Evelyn's control. No guardians, no restrictions, complete authority at age 22. Constance, facing prosecution for fraud, had agreed to a settlement, a modest income and residence in the Dower House, with no claim to estate management. Evelyn was, quite suddenly, free. On her last evening at Wetherby, Beatrice arrived unexpectedly, asking to speak privately. They met in the morning room, and Evelyn was shocked by the change in her stepsister. Beatrice looked younger somehow, less diminished. "I was a coward," Beatrice said without preamble. "I watched her hurt you and said nothing. I'm sorry." "You were trapped too," Evelyn replied gently. "I understand. I'm leaving her," Beatrice's voice strengthened. "Going to live with our aunt in Bath. Starting over, learning who I am without mother's voice in my head." Evelyn embraced her impulsively, and Beatrice returned it fiercely. Two women escaping the same prison, taking different paths to freedom. Forgiveness, Evelyn realized, is freedom too. Lady Margaret's goodbye was characteristically direct. "Come back when you're ready." "He'll wait. The fool is utterly besotted." "What if I'm not ready for a long time?" Evelyn asked. "Then it will be a long wait, but worth it." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Go be extraordinary, my dear. You already are." The carriage journey back to Hargrave House felt surreal. Evelyn clutched her father's pocket watch, its familiar weight grounding her. Through the window, she watched Weatherby disappear behind the trees and caught one last glimpse of Alexander standing on the terrace, watching her leave. "Time to discover who I am," she thought, opening the watch to read its inscription one more time. "Time reveals all truth, my darling girl. Let's find out what truth time reveals," she whispered. Behind her, Alexander stood alone on the terrace long after the carriage vanished. The estate felt emptier than it had in years, but mixed with the loneliness was something unexpected. Hope. She would come back, or she wouldn't. Either way, he'd given her the greatest gift he could, the freedom to choose her own future. He turned back to Weatherby, alone but strangely at peace. Whatever truth time revealed, they would face it honestly. And that, perhaps, was the truest form of love. Chapter 8. Becoming. Letter 1. 2 weeks after leaving Weatherby. Dearest Alexander, Hargrave House feels different now. It's mine, truly mine. I walked through Father's study yesterday and wept, but this time with relief, not grief. I'm home. Mr. Blackwell has been invaluable. Every document, every deed, now bears my name alone. Constance tried to contest the settlement, but her solicitor convinced her she'd face criminal charges if she pursued it. She remains in the dower house, bitter and isolated. I should hate her, perhaps. Instead, I pity her. What a small, fearful life she must have led to become so cruel. The staff have returned those Constance dismissed. Their joy at coming home mirrors my own. Mrs. Fletcher, our old housekeeper, actually embraced me. "You look like yourself again, my lady," she said. "I'm not sure I knew who that was 6 months ago, but I'm discovering her now. I miss our debates about Tudor politics. I miss the library at Weatherby. I miss, well, that's enough confession for one letter. Yours in friendship, Evelyn." First month, reclaiming the estate. The September sun beat down on the south fields as Evelyn stood among her tenant farmers, her practical boots muddied and her hair escaping its pins. She'd called this meeting herself, asking, not ordering the farmers to share their concerns about the estate's management. Thomas Webb, a weathered man of perhaps 60 with hands like gnarled oak, spoke with the blunt honesty of someone who'd spent his life working the land. "Begging your pardon, Lady Evelyn, but the drainage in the low fields has been failing for 2 years now. Lady Constance wouldn't authorize repairs. We lose a quarter of the crop every spring to standing water." "Show me," Evelyn said simply. Webb blinked, surprised. "Show you, my lady? I can't fix what I don't understand. Show me the problem." They walked the fields together, Evelyn and a dozen farmers who'd expected a brief audience, not an inspection. She asked questions, took notes in a leather-bound journal, listened with the intensity her father had taught her. The drainage issue, the cottages with failing roofs, the outdated crop rotation that exhausted the soil. "Estate management ain't women's work," Webb muttered, though not unkindly. "No disrespect meant, but these are complex matters." "My father taught me everything," Evelyn interrupted, her voice steady. "Every contract, every system, every decision. Watch what I can do, Mr. Webb, then tell me again what is and isn't my work." 3 months later, when the new drainage system was installed and functioning perfectly, Thomas Webb tipped his hat to Evelyn with genuine respect. She overheard him speaking to another farmer. "Lord Hargrave would be right proud of her, sharp as any man I've known, and twice as fair." The compliment, backhanded as it was, made her smile for the rest of the day. Letter 2. 8 weeks later. Alexander. Success. The new drainage system is installed in the south fields. Thomas Webb, Remember I mentioned him? Actually smiled at me yesterday. For that man, it's equivalent to a standing ovation. I've discovered I'm good at this. Not just competent, but genuinely skilled. There's a satisfaction in solving problems, in seeing immediate results of decisions. Is this what you feel managing Weatherby? This sense of building something that matters, that will outlast you? Lady Thornbury called today with thinly veiled questions about my situation with you. I told her we were friends. The look on her face suggested she found that both incomprehensible and scandalous. Apparently, gentlemen and ladies cannot be friends in her world. But we are friends, aren't we? Even if, there might be more. I attended my first London event last week, a small musical evening at Lady Hertford's. I wasn't sure how I'd be received, given the scandal. Some doors are closed to me now. The Pemberton sisters cut me directly, and Mrs. Wessex made a pointed comment about damaged reputations, but others have opened. I met several fascinating women. Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, a widow who runs her late husband's shipping company and speaks 5 languages. Miss Georgiana Hart, a blue-stocking who writes political essays under a male pseudonym, and Lady Catherine Pembroke, a baroness who advocates for education reform and women's property rights. They've invited me to join their circle. They call themselves the Society for Inconvenient Women. I like them immensely. We meet weekly to discuss everything from philosophy to politics to how we might change laws that treat us as property. Missing our conversations, though these letters help, Evelyn. 3 months, London season. The Hartwick Ball glittered with candlelight and jewels, London society in full display. Evelyn wore a gown of deep emerald silk, not the pale, insipid colours Constance had forced on her, but a rich shade that brought out the green in her eyes. She'd arrived with Mrs. Thornton and Miss Hart, her inconvenient women, providing both companionship and social armour. She danced. She conversed about agricultural policy with a member of Parliament who seemed genuinely surprised by her knowledge. She laughed at Sir James Thornton's terrible poetry, while privately thinking Alexander would have made better observations about the metaphor's structural flaws. Lord Benedict Hartley approached during supper, his kind face earnest. "Lady Evelyn, I wonder if I might call on you at Hargrave House. I've enjoyed our conversations immensely." "Of course, Lord Hartley. You're always welcome." But even as she smiled, Evelyn's mind catalogued the differences. Hartley was intelligent but unimaginative, kind but predictable. Sir James was handsome and charming, but shallow as a puddle. Every man she met seemed to be missing something essential, though she couldn't or wouldn't name what. "Testing your feelings, my dear." Evelyn turned to find Lady Margaret beside her, resplendent in purple silk, and looking thoroughly amused. "I thought distance might diminish them," Evelyn admitted quietly. "It hasn't." Margaret's smile was knowing. "Good. Now you know." Letter 3, 4 months. "Alexander, your letter about the drainage issues at Weatherby made me laugh. Who knew we'd bond over agricultural engineering? Though I suppose it's fitting, both practical and absurd, like so much of life. I've been courted. There, I've said it. Lord Hartley is persistent and genuinely kind. He speaks intelligently about literature and treats me with respect. Sir James writes terrible poetry, truly atrocious, but has excellent taste in art and makes me laugh. Neither makes my heart race. Is that shallow? To want the heart racing alongside the intellectual connection? I used to think love was a luxury, something for frivolous girls in novels who had nothing better to occupy their minds. Now I think it's essential. Not the all-consuming passion that devours and destroys, but the steady flame that illuminates. The kind that makes you want to be better, do better, see more clearly. The Society for Inconvenient Women met at Hargrave House this week. We discussed property rights for married women. Did you know that upon marriage, everything I own, this estate, my inheritance, even the clothes on my back, would become my husband's property? The law sees wives as legal non-entities, unable to own property, sign contracts, or even have legal custody of their own children. It makes your proposal even more remarkable. You offered partnership, not ownership, equality, not possession. I think about that often, daily, if I'm honest. Affectionately yours, Evelyn. 5 months. The charity project. The newly constructed schoolhouse stood at the edge of Hargrave's tenant village, its fresh whitewash gleaming in the November sun. Inside, 20 children of various ages sat on simple benches, their faces scrubbed clean, their attention fixed on Evelyn as she wrote numbers on a slate board. If you have 3 apples, she said, turning to face her students, and you share them equally among 6 people, how much does each person receive? Little Sarah Webb's hand shot up. Half an apple each, my lady. Excellent, Sarah. And if you had 12 apples and 6 people? The children called out answers, their enthusiasm genuine. Evelyn had flour on her dress from the morning's baking lesson, chalk dust on her hands, and a loose curl falling across her forehead. She'd never felt more purposeful in her life. After the lessons, Mrs. Fletcher found her tidying the classroom. You're happy, my lady. Truly happy. Evelyn paused, considering. I am. For the first time, I'm building something that's entirely mine, something that matters. But that night, alone in her father's study, she sat with his pocket watch in her hands, tracing the familiar inscription. The truth she'd been avoiding pressed against her chest. I'm happy, Papa, she whispered to the empty room. But I'd be happier if I could share this with him. Letter 4. 5.5 months. Alexander, I had a revelation today. I was teaching mathematics to the farmers' children. We've opened a school on the estate. Did I mention that? 20 students so far, ages 6 to 14. Learning, reading, mathematics, basic science. Mrs. Fletcher thinks I've gone mad, but she helps with the baking lessons. Little Sarah Webb asked me if I was married. When I said no, she asked why not. You're pretty and clever, she said with perfect child logic. Don't you want to be? I told her I was waiting to meet the right person. She asked, how will you know he's right? And I realized, I already know. I know because when good things happen, the drainage working perfectly, Sarah solving a difficult problem, the first harvest from our improved crop rotation, you're the person I want to tell. When problems arise, a cottage roof collapses, a tenant disputes boundaries, I can't balance the accounts, I wonder what advice you'd give. I know because when I read something interesting, I imagine your response. When I see something beautiful, I wish you were there to see it too. I know because I'm happy in my independence. I've proven I can stand alone, manage an estate, build something meaningful. But I'd be happier sharing it with you, not because I need you to complete me, but because joy shared is joy multiplied. I know because 6 months of distance has clarified rather than diminished my feelings. This isn't gratitude or safety or the relief of rescue. This is choice. This is love. I'm ready, Alexander. Not because I need you, but because I choose you. The season ends in 3 weeks. There's a closing ball at the Hartfield estate. I believe you've been invited. Will you be there? With love. Yes, I'm finally saying it. Evelyn, Alexander. Reading the letter. Alexander stood at the window of his study at Wetherby, reading Evelyn's letter for the 3rd time. 6 months he'd waited, giving her the space she needed, maintaining distance, even when every instinct screamed to ride to Hargrave House, and what? Undermine everything he'd promised? Pressure her into a decision she wasn't ready to make? But this letter, these words, I choose you. James Worthington found him standing there, grinning like a fool at a piece of paper. Good news? James asked, though the answer was obvious. Send word to London, Alexander said, folding the letter carefully. I'll need my formal attire prepared. The good tailcoat, not the everyday one. James's knowing smile was insufferable. Finally. What do you mean, finally? I've been patient. You've been miserable. But yes, admirably patient in your misery. James clapped him on the shoulder. I'm happy for you. She's extraordinary. She is, Alexander agreed quietly. Absolutely extraordinary. Preparing for the ball. Evelyn stood before the mirror in her bedroom at Hargrave House, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The pale, subdued ghost from 7 months ago had been replaced by someone vibrant and assured. Her gown was midnight blue silk, elegant without being ostentatious. Her hair was dressed simply but beautifully. Around her neck hung her father's pocket watch on a gold chain, something borrowed, something cherished. Mrs. Fletcher fussed with the gown's hem, her eyes suspiciously bright. He's a lucky man, whoever he is. Evelyn's smile was radiant. I think I'm the lucky one, Mrs. Fletcher. I've discovered who I am. Now I get to choose who I want to be with. She touched the watch gently, feeling its steady tick against her palm. Time reveals all truth, my darling girl. It revealed that I'm stronger than I knew, she whispered. And that love, real love, is choosing to share that strength with someone who values it. Outside, the carriage waited to take her to London, to the Hartfield ball, to Alexander, to her future not as someone's rescued damsel or grateful dependent, but as a woman who'd discovered herself and was now freely, joyfully choosing her path. She took one last look in the mirror, lifted her chin, and walked toward whatever truth the evening would reveal. Chapter 9. The Choice. The Hartfield ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and the jewels adorning London's finest. Evelyn stood at the entrance, alone and unhurried, taking in the scene with calm assessment. This was the same society that had witnessed her humiliation 7 months ago, the whispers, the judgment, the scandal. But the woman who'd been slapped in a garden was not the woman who stood here now. Heads turned. Whispers started. Evelyn lifted her chin and walked into the ballroom with measured grace, her midnight blue gown catching the light, her father's pocket watch gleaming at her throat. Evelyn, Mrs. Adelaide Thornton, appeared at her elbow. Miss Georgiana Hart and Lady Catherine Pembroke flanking her, the Society for Inconvenient Women, arriving as reinforcements. Ready for your grand entrance into respectability? Evelyn's smile was genuine. I'm not sure I want respectability if it requires diminishing myself. That's our girl, Lady Catherine said approvingly. Come, let's scandalize the Pemberton sisters by discussing women's property rights near the refreshment table. The ballroom's energy shifted perceptibly as Alexander entered with Lady Margaret on his arm. The Duke of Wetherby rarely attended London events. His presence alone was noteworthy. But it was the way he moved through the crowd, polite but purposeful, that made people pause mid-conversation. His eyes found Evelyn immediately across the crowded space. The same charged awareness from 7 months ago arced between them, but transformed now, not desperate or uncertain, but deliberate, chosen. He didn't approach immediately, instead allowing her the space to set the pace, to make her own decisions about how this evening would unfold. Lady Margaret noticed, of course. He's being remarkably well behaved, she murmured to Evelyn during a passing moment. I threatened him quite thoroughly about respecting your autonomy. You didn't need to threaten him, Evelyn said softly. He already understands. I know, dear. But it was fun anyway. Lord Hartley approached as a waltz began, his kind face hopeful. Lady Evelyn, may I have this dance? She accepted his hand, and they moved into the familiar patterns of the dance. Hartley was an excellent dancer, attentive without being overbearing, and for 3 months he'd been nothing but respectful in his courtship. Lady Evelyn, he said as they turned, I wonder if I might speak plainly. I've always appreciated your plainness, Lord Hartley. You are everything I could want in a wife. Intelligent, capable, kind. You've accomplished extraordinary things with your estate. I would be honored, deeply honored, if you would consent to marry me. The proposal was traditional, respectful, exactly what many women would hope to receive. Evelyn felt genuine affection for him, but not love. Never love. Lord Hartley, you deserve someone who loves you without reservation, she said gently. I cannot be that person, but I'm honored by your regard, and I hope we can remain friends. Disappointment flickered across his features, but he managed a graceful smile. I suspected as much. Your heart is elsewhere. I think it is. Then he's a fortunate man. I wish you both joy. As the dance ended, Evelyn felt a weight lift. She could refuse without guilt, knowing her own heart, trusting her own judgment. The growth of 7 months crystallized in that moment. Alexander danced with Lady Thornbury, then Miss Hartfield, then Lady Wessex society watching, speculating, whispering, but his attention kept drifting to where Evelyn stood, conversing with a member of Parliament about agricultural reform, her animation and confidence drawing a small crowd. They orbited each other throughout the evening like celestial bodies, aware of each other constantly, but maintaining their separate paths. Lady Margaret found Evelyn near the terrace doors. You're both being ridiculous. Just go talk to each other. I want him to ask me properly, in front of everyone, Evelyn said. No more shadows or speculation. If we're choosing this, let's choose it openly. Margaret's smile was fierce with approval. Bold. I like it. As midnight approached, Evelyn slipped onto the terrace for air. The November night was crisp, stars visible above the London haze. Music drifted from the ballroom, another waltz beginning, laughter and conversation blending into gentle noise. Lady Evelyn. She turned to find Alexander silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the ballroom's glow. He looked uncertain, in a way she'd never seen him this powerful, assured Duke nervous as a schoolboy. You look radiant, he said, stepping onto the terrace. I feel it, she smiled, moving toward him. These 6 months, Alexander, they've been extraordinary. The estate is thriving. The school has 20 students now. I've made genuine friends, not just social acquaintances. I've discovered I'm good at things I never had the chance to try." He listened with that intense focus she'd missed, drinking in every word. "Are you going to ask me?" she said gently. "Or shall I ask you?" His surprised laugh was exactly what she needed to hear. "I've been planning this moment for months, and you're taking charge of it? Partnership means either of us can lead." Alexander took her hands, and Evelyn was aware they were visible from the ballroom, another public moment, another choice made in full view of society. "Evelyn, I've spent 6 months wondering if I made a terrible mistake letting you go." His voice was rough with emotion. "But reading your letters, seeing what you've accomplished, watching you tonight, commanding rooms, refusing proposals, being absolutely yourself, I know it was right. You needed to discover your strength. I needed to understand that loving you doesn't mean protecting you. It means trusting you." He drew a breath. "So I'm asking again, but differently. Not, will you marry me and let me take care of you, but will you marry me and build a life with me as equals? Will you argue with me about politics and beat me at chess and challenge my assumptions? Will you be my partner in every sense of the word?" Evelyn's response was immediate. "I will, not because I need you, but because you choose me," Alexander finished. "I know." Their kiss was witnessed by half the ballroom deeper than their first, a claiming and a promise, a public declaration that left no room for doubt or speculation. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by scattered applause from the Society for Inconvenient Women and Lady Margaret's distinctive "Finally." When they parted, both were breathless and grinning like fools. They walked back into the ballroom together, hands clasped, and Alexander addressed the room with ducal authority. "Lady Evelyn Hargrave has agreed to become my wife. I trust we have your support." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Reactions were mixed, some scandalized, some delighted, some simply confused about what they'd just witnessed. But Evelyn stood tall beside Alexander, choosing her future openly, and discovered she didn't care what anyone thought. She'd found herself. She'd chosen love, and she was free. The chapel at Wetherby was intimate, filled with people who mattered. Evelyn wore cream silk and her father's pocket watch. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises of partnership, equality, mutual respect. Lady Margaret wept openly, shocking everyone who knew her. As sunlight caught the watch's inscription, "Time reveals all truth," Evelyn thought of how far she'd come. 6 months later, the library at Wetherby held both of them, working side by side on estate plans. Comfortable silence punctuated by spirited debate about crop rotation versus fallow periods. "You're wrong about the nitrogen levels," Evelyn said, laughing. "I'm the Duke. I can't be wrong. You absolutely can be. Look at these figures." He studied her calculations, then groaned. "Fine. You're right." She kissed him in victory. 1 year later, the combined estate meeting brought together farmers from both Hargrave and Wetherby. Evelyn presented modernization plans, while Alexander stood beside her, supportive but letting her lead. Thomas Webb muttered to another farmer, "The Duke's a lucky man. Got himself an equal, not an ornament." Evening painted the Wetherby gardens in gold and rose. Evelyn and Alexander walked together past the fountain where everything had changed. She read aloud from a book while he listened, occasionally interjecting observations. "Who would have thought a slap would lead to freedom?" Evelyn mused. Alexander's response was immediate. "Not freedom. You already had that inside you. Just the chance to claim it. And you?" His kiss to her forehead was tender. "The chance to choose love over duty. Best decision I ever made." They stood silhouetted against the sunset, equal partners, choosing each other daily, building a life neither could have imagined 7 months ago. Time had indeed revealed all truth. That strength comes from within, that love is choice, and that the greatest freedom is finding someone you choose to share it with, not because you must, but because you want to. And so, dear listeners, Evelyn discovered that true freedom isn't found in the absence of connection, but in the courage to choose it on your own terms. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about being saved, they're about saving yourself, then choosing to share that strength with someone who values it. If Evelyn and Alexander's journey touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and allows me to bring you more stories of love, courage, and second chances. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between safety and freedom? Or perhaps you've experienced a love that respected your independence rather than trying to control it. Share your thoughts below. I read every single comment, and your stories often inspire future tales. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Coming up next, we have another sweeping historical romance about a widowed countess who must choose between her late husband's fortune and the penniless artist who sees the woman she truly is. Thank you for spending this time with me, letting me share Evelyn and Alexander's story with you. Remember, you are worthy of love that celebrates your strength, not one that diminishes it. Until next time, dear listeners, may you always choose courage over comfort and love over fear.